Thank you, Mary. It's extraordinary to be here. It feels a bit dream-like to me to be seeing so many friends here. Just let me get out of this one and get into another one. So thank you to Mary Chapman and to Patricia Badir, Patsy Badir, and then I'm going to stop that. Thank you to Heather and Elisa for helping to make this possible. I've just been told that it's Matthew Evenden who actually was one of the principal drivers for the creation of the hub, and therefore the reason that I could be here in Vancouver. So thank you. Okay, I'll just let it go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk about why public scholarship has shifted from an opportunity with an institutional frame of reference to a responsibility. A responsibility that, for me, is a duty of care in two ways. That it's a duty of care to the political and natural world, and this is becoming increasingly evident to many of us here, that we can no longer stay within the walls of the academy, that what we might have might be of use in the tasks that we're facing, both politically and environmentally. But it's also a duty of care to the young scholars who go through our programs to graduate degrees, PhDs. We need to develop public humanities to increase the pathways that lead from the PhDs into gainful and valuable work in different sectors within society. And this is, of course, something that I've been working on with other people very hard for 8 or 9 years now. So I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to bring forward 5 interrelated ways, and they're very interrelated, as you will see, of moving our research and teaching into public space and public action. And I will leave time for conversation, because I think that's what we're here for. I'm going to set the table, but that's what I'm doing, and I think that it's very important for all of us to talk and think together about the work that we need to do to turn this big machine. Don't have to turn it all the way around, but turn it so that to some degree it faces the world outside the academy. Because we somehow have left that too long. We've left that task too long. A couple of things before that. One is just a word about, a thought about the word public. You do not have to publish in the New Yorker or some such publication in order to do public humanities scholarship. And one of the things that we learned over the course of the project Making Publics is that the public is an idea, the actual things, the entities are publics, and these are changeable and creatable. And so one of the things we can do to reorient our work to some degree toward the public is to engage with particular constituencies, particular publics, even possibly create new publics. So it's fine. I mean, if you publish a piece in the New Yorker, I am full of admiration for you. But you do not have to do that in order to do public scholarship. Another thing that I want to talk about before I get to the sort of main pitch I want to make is what moved me to do the work that I'm doing. And I have to say that I started off, I just like to play and I like to socialize. And I love hanging around with artists. I'm not an artist. I just admire them and I love their freedom and I love their creativity and I love to hang around. So when we created iPlay, the Institute for the Public Life of Arts and Ideas, we brought scholars together with artists, and we did it shamelessly and endlessly. And we said to the artists, you do not have to leave your vocabularies at the gates of the university to join with us. We will learn your vocabulary, you will learn some of our vocabulary, and we will move forward with that. And I had a great deal of time, and many people that we worked with had a great deal of time, a great deal of fun doing this work. And I think that I've maybe it's just age, but I've got more serious about this. It seems to me it's still playful, it's still fun, it's still a kind of community building undertaking, but it also seems to me to be addressing an area of very urgent responsibility in my life, and I think in the lives of others in the university. And I get one side of this from all of the work I've done on tracking PhD outcomes. Because one of the things that we've been doing for the past 5 years with the various phases of the TRaCE project is to track PhD outcomes across Canada in the humanities in statistical terms, but then also to reach out to the grads and to ask them to tell their stories. So I've gotten very close to a lot of people, and I've learned a lot about the kinds of things that PhD grads go through that I didn't go through because I went into a job, a university job. So that kind of has made a real impression on me and made me realize how important it is that we change how we do and what we do so that the work we do can lead and can be seen to lead to pathways outside the academy. And so that's been one of the things that's driving me. And the other thing that's driving me is a conversation that I had at a restaurant about 18 months ago. My son Tom, who lives here in Vancouver, was visiting us. And he's a 40-year-old director of a major union. He's a very successful guy. And we were talking about various things. And he said, I don't want to have kids. We never said you should have kids. But he said, I don't want to have kids. And he brought it up. I said, why not? And he said, because in 40 years, the planet won't be habitable. So this was one of the most shocking statements I have ever heard in my life. And it brought home to me the responsibility that I have as a parent, but also the responsibility that I have as a citizen and also as a scholar. So the question, one of the main questions for me over the past year is, what can scholars like me do to lend a hand in our capacity as scholars? And I'll have something to say about that. But this adds up to, for me, to a sense of urgency in terms of what we must do to make our scholarship public. This is not to dumb it down. If we did that, we would be betraying our mission. It's simply to teach it new skills, new ways of expressing itself, new ways of moving. So I think that adds up to something about why we need the humanities now, but it also has to do with the essential, what I think is the essential character of the humanities. And this little piece of prose comes from a report that we did years ago. It was one of the first things we did at iPlay, was to bring together faculty and students from the US and Canada for a meeting at McGill, a follow-up meeting at Vanderbilt, to write some kind of statement about the worth of the humanities. And what we said is that people in humanities work with others in society to create a particularly human world. If this is true, if any of this is true, then what we have is too good to keep for ourselves. And we really need to learn how to share it with others outside of what we're doing. Mary mentioned that we've just started the TRaCE McGill Project. It's the third phase of the TRaCE work. And we've changed it. This is all McGill, but it's every faculty at the university. So we're tracking almost 6,000 PhD grads from all the faculties, the graduating classes from 2008 to 2018. And we're going to produce good, solid statistical data on PhD outcomes and where we are now. And as we have developed a methodology, we're training student researchers to reach out to the grads and ask them if they would consent to be interviewed. And about 10%, maybe 600 people, which is a lot of interviews, will consent to be interviewed. We have amazing software that transcribes the audio into print, and we edit and post these stories on our website so that people who are in program now, doing a PhD now, can see what others have done before them and what they're doing now. And if they find somebody who's doing a really interesting kind of work, they can reach out to that person and ask that person if that person will talk to them. And the people who have agreed to be interviewed get it. They know that it's important to be available to people who are coming after them. We also collect stories. I just published this piece in University Affairs. It's 4 stories about PhD grads, actually one of them hasn't completed her PhD yet, who are choosing not to follow an academic pathway. And yet they're doing really good work, really valuable work, and work that also pays for them to live. So they're kind of pathfinders for public humanities. One of them is is the research director for the Refugee Hub at the University of Ottawa. Another is the executive director of CBC IDEAS. People doing valuable work even with their PhDs. It's not just that the public humanities will enable us to do a much better job in graduate education. That's a very important part of what we're doing. It's also that the world needs us. So the political world, as you know, is in considerable difficulty. One of the things, and I've been saying this to a lot of people, one of the things that I grew up not thinking, simply assuming to be true, is that I was living in a world that was after the end of history. That we had entered a steady state after the Second World War and the Holocaust, and things were just going to go on like that way forever. When Trump was elected, I realized with a shock that I was still living in history. And events that followed have proven that is true. And history, of course, is the place where cataclysmic change happens, where empires fall. And what we're seeing in my own enlightened province is this particular Bill 21 that came from the CAQ, the Coalition Avenir du Québec. And it means that, and we're already seeing this, is that women who wear hijabs, who have trained at Quebec universities to become teachers and have secured jobs as teachers, can't teach. We have a number of people who've already left the province to seek employment elsewhere. So even in Quebec, and of course it's a very complicated case, what we're seeing is situations that are reviving something that we've studied in the Conversion Project, and that is the hatred and fear of the other, which was a central feature of the early modern period in Europe. This is a painting by Muela de Cortez, and it's an event that happened. I don't think you can see it adequately, but I'll tell you what it's depicting. 1609, Philip III of Spain declared the final expulsion of the Moriscos, the Spanish Muslims, even though they had at least formally converted to Catholicism. And in this painting, they've taken to a hilltop to fight off the army that is coming to expel them from Spain, their home and the home of their parents and their parents' parents. And you can see that people have fallen or chosen suicide rather than submit to the force of the Spanish government. So the history behind Bill 21 is extremely important for people to understand. And I think if my fellow citizens in Quebec understood something of the history, that they might think differently about their support of Bill 21 and the present expulsion of young Muslim women who cannot teach in the province. It's of course not just the political situation that is dire, it is the climate emergency that we're facing. And this is from a piece in The Guardian. And I just as soon as I read the first paragraph, I went, that is such an important thing to say. It is true that the stories we read in the New York Times or in any newspaper you pick up in the morning can break your heart. And we need to face the truth about the situation, the environmental situation, but we need stories that do not sap our strength to survive. And this is what Nicky Hawkins is saying in The Guardian. Cormac McCarthy's novel, The Road, is for me the exemplary novel of the Anthropocene. It's beautiful and completely heartbreaking. So I don't want to say anything bad about this novel. It's a great novel. But I want to point out the problems that it represents for us and the way it brings forward our need for new stories. The road crossed a dried slough where pipes of ice stood out of the frozen mud like formations in a cave. The remains of an old fire by the side of the road. Beyond that, a long concrete causeway, a dead swamp. Dead trees standing out of the gray water, trailing gray and relic hag moss. The silky spills of ash along the curbing. He stood leaning on the gritty concrete rail. Perhaps in the world's destruction it would be possible at last to see how it was made. Oceans, mountains, the ponderous counter-spectacle of things ceasing to be, the sweeping waste, hydroptic and coldly secular. The silence. And for those of you who perhaps haven't read the novel or have forgotten it, it's the story of a father and a son making their way through an utterly destroyed landscape after what's called an annihilation event. If there are human beings around, they become feral, they become cannibalistic. The man and his son are for some reason trying to get to the ocean as if that could be a place of refuge. In the end, toward the end, the man dies. His son is taken in by a family. There's the faintest glimmer of hope, but it's not enough. And the final paragraph of the novel, which is one of the most beautiful things, is a song of grieving. Once there were brook trout in the streams, in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand, polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming. Maps and mazes of a thing which could not be put back, not be made right again. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. So if Nicky Hawkins is right that we need new narratives, then it seems to me that it's literary scholars who have to answer that call. Who better than us? We are the caretakers of the canon. We know the literature better than anyone else, I think. So could we do that? And I took a stab at it in a piece that's coming out in English Literary Renaissance. And I said, it's Milton, stupid. Milton's story is the story of a planet struck by death. But what happens in Milton is different from what happens in Cormac McCarthy. I'll just share this with you. As you know, they don't obey, they fall, and they pay the price for it. They are expelled from paradise. And before the expulsion, the angel Michael comes down and has a long talk with Adam. And it's not even Adam, it's not even a talk, it's like this virtual reality thing. He puts special drugs on Adam's eyes so that Adam can see the future. And Eve is sent off to sleep, but she, in her dreams, she seems to grasp, as well as Adam does, what the future holds in store for them. And the story that Michael tells is a story of suffering and death. The first thing that Adam sees is one man kill another man. And Adam says to Michael, I've heard about death. I didn't know. Now I see it. It's terrible. And Michael says, Adam, actually I have something worse to tell you. And it goes on from there. And as those of you who've read the poem recently, it's hard to get through those stories that Michael tells, because it's a story of endless suffering and death and betrayal and hatred. And at the end, of course, they are expelled. So Milton captures the death-racked planet that Cormac McCarthy describes in his novel. But the poem is very different. For one thing, the planet of death that Adam and Eve have created by their disobedience makes moral sense. It's not an easy moral sense to grasp, but it's something you struggle with. The important thing from my point of view is for Cormac McCarthy and all the other annihilation stories that we read are stories where the annihilation is the end of human history. But for Milton's Paradise Lost, the story of suffering and death is integral to human history. It is our history. This is from the end, as you recall. High in front advanced the brandished sword of God before them blazed, fierce as a comet, which with torrid heat and vapor as the Libyan air adust began to parch the temperate clime, so that the situation Adam and Eve encounter on their expulsion from Eden is like the situation we face now. They, looking back, all the eastern side beheld of paradise. So late their happy seat, waved over by that flaming brand. The gate with dreadful faces thronged and fiery arms, some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them. And where to choose their place of rest and providence their guide, they hand in hand, with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way. They are walking forward into human history. They are not fleeing at the very end of human history. So Milton's Paradise Lost, for only one example of a possible text we can bring forward, tells a story that tells the truth, but not in a way that breaks the hearts of the readers. And you don't have to take on Milton's theology in order to enter the poem and understand our situation by talking with others inside the structure of the poem. Okay, so I think that that's my pitch about public humanities. Here's 5 ways of doing it, and these are very interrelated, and I think also they're going to be familiar in so many ways to you. Number 1 is interdisciplinarity, and this is where it all starts. And I've done a lot of this kind of work. When it's working, it makes your head hurt. But the great thing about sustained interdisciplinary research is that it opens up larger questions. It can open up larger questions. So one example is the Shakespeare Moot Court that my dear friend Desmond Manderson, who was a law professor at McGill, now he's gone back to Australia, and I created some years ago. And we ran it for 5 years. It was a graduate course for English students and a course for law students. We paired them up into mooting teams, and we made up cases. One of the cases is about a woman who wore a niqab, a full covering of her face, and she was expelled because of a particular law that we made up in Quebec, but it's actually not perhaps going to come around in reality. And she was expelled from her school, and her counsel brought the case to the Court of Shakespeare. And in the Court of Shakespeare, it's Shakespeare's works that are the Constitution. And the students have to develop their arguments based on the law, and the law is Shakespeare. And every time we did this, when we held a moot court at the law faculty, we got over 100 people from the university community, outside the community, to come and watch the students argue their case in front of a specially constituted bench of professors, and both law profs and literature profs, and some others. So we did that for 5 years. One of our cases, I'm very proud, before the federal government passed the law, recognized that same-sex marriage was legal in the jurisdiction of the Shakespearean law. And I should tell you that the Shakespeare Court is the highest appellate court in the world. There is nothing higher. So that's one example of how to use interdisciplinarity. One of the nice things about this is that it doesn't cost much money. some of the things that we've done cost money, although I think universities, and one of the great things about UBC, as I've been learning today, UBC is actually putting money into the humanities. Another way to do it is by changing spaces, changing platforms. So years ago, we did a large project funded by SSHRC called Making Publics Maps. And we had the great good fortune to partner with CBC IDEAS. And we had an embedded reporter with us for the full 5 years of the project. And at the end of this, he was a wonderful person, David Cayley. He produced a 14-episode series on ideas about the origins of the modern public based on the work that we had done. So by engaging with him, we were able to get our ideas to a much broader audience. And it also, of course, it has this wonderful kind of rollback effect, because knowing he was there made us more careful about what we were saying, made us more articulate. It happened also that a man who is a business writer and kind of public affairs writer in the United States, Jeff Jarvis, was struggling with a book that went on to be called Public Parts when he heard the series on NPR. And that is what he says in the book, is that opened his eyes, and then he realized he could finish the book. So there are all of these ways in which if you can land on a particular platform, find your work in a certain space, it begins to have the power to move. 3 is just, it's like talk differently, write differently. And this is something we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our students, especially our graduate students, to teach them different skills. Academic writing is wonderful. Great academic writing is great writing, but it's not the only way to write. So I just like this a lot, and this is Serena Parmar in the Bard production of All's Well. So one of the things that I've been doing is trying my hand at writing for non-academic readers and doing a series of Thinking with Shakespeare pieces. This is Thinking with Shakespeare about sexual justice. And one of the things that I do with my graduate students is invite them to try their hand at this different kind of writing. I'm not worried for one moment that it will ruin them, that they will lose the ability to write for academic publications. This is what got me into this in the first place. I just love hanging out with artists. Work with artists. And once the artists and the scholars get over their initial shyness, they have a great deal to bring to each other. Here's something we did last year in Toronto. Tony Dawson was there, Patsy Badir was there. We called this Playing for Free. It was about slavery, conversion, and freedom. And we recruited these extraordinary actors from the Stratford Festival to play with us at the Ryerson Performance Center. And we did a cut-down version of the Tempest, and we worked for a day and a half with the artists on the text and thinking about conversion, thinking about slavery, thinking about how you get free. And then on the evening of the second day, we performed before a small but lovely audience at Ryerson. But it wasn't just the actors who were performing. In between scenes, the scholars had to come up and do something scintillating. And they were on the clock. I told them, you got 3 minutes, and then the buzzer goes. And we did a really good job. So, and it was a great deal of fun. We learned a lot from each other. I think we brought something to a small but wonderful public audience. And the graduate student, one of my graduate students who was there, she and I have just written an essay coming out of that, which I think will be published in The Conversation. This is the last one. Make new publics, because there's no such thing in reality as the public. Every individual public aspires to become the public, to grow up and become the public. But there is no such thing. It is an idea rather than a real social entity. One way in which we did this in a series of events that was sponsored by iPlay was to do this really interesting thing with artists. This was actually at Ryerson as well. where we brought a group of artists from the Toronto area together with about 50 business people, bankers, people who are willing to play. And we put them on an island where they were all alone, and they had to find how to use art to make an environment in which they could be happy to live and grow. And each artist led a group. The members of the group had to swear they had no background in the art form. So there was a dancer. Ken Dryden was there. I watched Ken Dryden learn how to dance, and he is a beautiful dancer. But he swore he had no dance experience before that. So each of these groups worked with a single artist. We gave them 2.5 hours to learn an art form and to create a collaborative work of art that would speak to the dilemma that we had stranded on this island, how we could transform this island into a place where we wanted to live. And so we did. We did that. Each time we did it 8 times at various conferences. We did it at the Creativity and Commerce Conference, this big kind of conference in Montreal. And we started to build a community of people who recognize that art can actually solve problems, can build community. And also, they discovered, it was a surprise to us, that people can learn an art form. Non-dancers can learn how to dance in an hour and a half. So it's up to us. I chose this. Eve is actually looking a little more optimistic than Adam. So I don't want to downplay the seriousness of our present situation. But you know, you can see that the angel is kind of on their side. It's okay, Adam. Yes, you will die, but that's what happens. So let's have some questions, conversation about public humanities.
Questions, comments? You want to add a 6th way?
Good.
I'm a graduate student here at CBC.
Hi.
I'm an interdisciplinary student and
Yeah.
I'm a brand new public scholar. And I want to work with mathematicians. How do
Great.
I do that? If you work with artists,
Yep.
how can I invite mathematicians to participate in a similar way?
What is your field?
It's a
Or fields.
combination of literature, creative writing, and math.
Okay. That kind of problem is always a problem, a challenge that we face with iPlay. I mean, at one point we had a group working on brain, mind, soul, where we brought people from the neuro together with historians of religion and literary scholars and historians of philosophy. And food was always a good thing. Seriously, I'm not kidding about this. You know, come, we'll have food, we'll talk, we just want to get together and start getting people invested, because you have to know what their questions are and how what you're going to bring to the table might be of interest and use to them. So I think you just have to reach out to people, tell them who you are, and you have to find people who are willing to take risks, are willing to move out of their comfort zone. But what I've learned is that the university is actually filled to the rafters with such people. And you just have to say, it's okay, and give them permission, and they start to play.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, thanks very much for that talk.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. I just have a question, and it's about thinking about ourselves in relation maybe to other people. And as a first generation graduate, college graduate, and obviously all the way through to PhD, I sometimes find that academics can make people feel very uncomfortable. And it makes you wonder about whether or not, before people perhaps think about their positionality, whether or not they should move into dealing with the public. Sometimes I wonder about encouraging a process of self-reflection amongst all of ourselves, and how you encourage people to do that before perhaps going to
Okay.
that let's have an event stage.
That's really good. I mean, one thing is the use of the elevator. So you get one of your colleagues or you yourself on an elevator with another person, and you have 10 floors to explain to that person what you're doing and why it matters. I would love for faculty to have their own 3-minute thesis competition, so that we would learn how to speak about what we do in ways that is completely accessible to a mixed audience and in a way that conveys the importance of what we're doing. So I think that's one thing. And when we were doing iPlay, we had these great teachers like doing talks at libraries around Montreal. And very often, I know this person. I know what a wonderful teacher she is. Why does she not know how to pitch it for a non-academic audience?
Mr. Paul, it's not so much pitching. I'm thinking more about things like correcting people's pronunciation. And things like technical things like that people don't think about how alienating that could be, or correcting people's various Englishes. So one of the things I'm wondering is less about how we can sell ourselves, but how we can avoid perhaps investing in our instinct to set people right at moments that aren't appropriate. And I've seen that happen a little bit too often at events where people are talking to, someone may say, oh, and they'll mispronounce the name. And then there'll be a correction in public or something like that, or they'll say something, or even at UBC. So I'm wondering how we can encourage ourselves maybe to think about not doing that, and if you have advice to that.
Well, the two things. One is just stop doing that. And the other thing is, and you know this from the classroom, listen to the other person. You know, and that's one of the major skills for any kind of teaching or interdisciplinary work or working with artists. You have to pay attention to what they're doing. Yeah.
I actually have the opposite question, the one that's being asked there, because one of the things that's happened to me recently is, since I've become department head, is that people who are not academics understand my job finally.
That's right.
So now I have a real job.
That's right.
I didn't have a real job before, and now I have a real job.
Well, congratulations to you.
So, and I deal with budgets, so that's a real job. So it's actually the opposite problem, and it's about the thing that happens when you move into a different public,
Yeah.
and people don't understand you at all. In fact, think that really all you do is play.
Yeah.
And it's a question of finding ways of contributing. Because I find, you talk about how fun it is to play with actors, and I love it too. But I find that I learn a lot more from them than they tend to learn from me. Maybe that's just because that's the way I am, but it's it's a question of kind of what we do and how that manifests itself in those kinds of spaces, and it's still puzzling.
The work we do for most of the history of the West was the place where people went if they wanted a career in the public life.
Yeah.
And it's with the growth of, the importation of the model of the research university from Germany that spread across North America, so that something happened and we forgot that the humanities was actually the foundation of public discourse and public life and the central form of education for people who wanted that kind of life. So there's a lot of work to do to begin to regain some sense of that role for ourselves. So one of the things I do in all my undergraduate classes over the last 4 years is I bring forward skills training, which I never thought I should do. And so I work with them on their writing, I work with them on their speaking, and I teach a course on the private and the public, so it's about how do you achieve public voice? Well, you have to be able to speak in certain ways and write in certain ways. So I think that we have to work to regain the place that we once had as educators. Hi.
Thank you for that magnificent talk.
Thank you.
And I forgot how touching the road is.
Yes, it is.
And my question has to do, maybe it's too specific, I'm an area studies foreign language scholar, right? So maybe it's about dissemination. We have a duty to our universities to do certain things in a certain way. That requires a lot of time.
Yes, yes.
So if you're working in another language, in other countries, in other areas, that requires time. So how, maybe it's a more of advice, how do you manage that? How do you map that?
The universities have to take on, as institutions have to take on this responsibility. In my sense, as universities, certainly in Canada, are ready to do this. And that means that to some degree we start shifting expectations and requirements for tenure and promotion. We admit as possibly valuable contributions public-facing work. And it's not, of course, because the core of what we do, the work that makes our potential public-facing work valuable is the research that we do. We don't want to stop doing that. That's got to be foundational. But we have to make a small space within the whole processes of promotion for public-facing work. So the universities register in their tenure and promotion processes their investment in public-facing work. And I think the universities, they've been ready to do this for quite some time.
Maybe a question from Alan and then from Alex.
That's me. So, hello.
Hi.
So I'm in, this is my musical accompaniment. We don't know. Who knows? Anyway, I'm in philosophy and I'm in science and technology
Yes.
studies.
Yeah.
So I think I can help you with mathematicians. But, so, you mentioned sort of the global political scene, but you didn't say much about the internal politics of the university.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us in humanities aren't so much inclined to play with artists as to play with scientists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, within the university, there is already a narrative about how we're going to solve our current problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's a narrative of scientific and technological progress.
Yes.
And for those of us in STS, we're at best irrelevant to what's going to solve our problem. And at worst, and very frequently, understood to be the enemy of progress. You know, the postmoderns, the people who don't understand that science and technology still is going to play this modernizing role. And it seems to me that this is a big problem for practically for some of us, and generally for humanities in the public sphere. So I was wondering if you wanted to say anything about that.
Well, I hear what you're saying very clearly. McGill is, you know, we're a little tail on a great big dog. I think that it's, you know, I would not suggest for a minute that we don't need the climatologists and the scientists and the engineers to work to solve the problems we face. I've been talking to PhD students in engineering who are working on new batteries. And we need new technology there to address the climate crisis so that our automobiles will not run with internal combustion engines. So I wouldn't say for a minute that it's only the people in the humanities who can address these problems, but I think that what we want to do is to try as well as hard as we can to bring what we have to bring to the task, and not to think, well, we have nothing, because I think we do have something to bring to the task, because I think the stories that we tell, to take that one piece of it, are extremely important for the health of society and the possibilities for survival. And so it's not just science. Science is extremely important, and the kind of technological advances we're seeing are going to be extremely important. But I think we also need the kinds of things that we can bring. And so it's modest, right? I am not going to invent a new battery. That is not something I could do. But I can bring forward the possibility of other stories and make them available through various platforms so that people can think differently about the situation that we're in.
Sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, sorry, no, Alex, and then.
Thanks, Mary. Paul, I really admire the optimism and forward-looking.
That's why I have this picture, so I won't be too optimistic seeming.
But I feel like I want to push back
Sure.
a little bit
Yep.
on it, that sense of optimism, because one of the things that I find when I'm having conversations with people who aren't academics, or even with people who are and who are interested in being more public-facing, is there's a kind of I feel a certain, I feel like I'm getting a little, I mean, and I'm using the word in big quotes, kind of a little religious, a little spiritual.
yeah.
I'm kind of preaching.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's where literary criticism comes from in a lot of ways. And maybe it's my natural register. Maybe we like to lecture, we like to talk.
Yeah.
But what I really want to do is I want to say there's a really complex and serious, and it can be a little pessimistic deconstruction in the discourses that I'm reading from. It can be a little hard. And my anxiety about the way that you frame the public humanities here is that it's taking away some of the urgency of what we're talking about, but that we bring a modicum of complexity to, and that is the lack of understanding of that complexity is precisely why the kind of prejudices that Alan is describing among the sciences, it's precisely because they already think to a large extent that this is what we are, and that we are the tail that of the dog. When in fact, some of the things that we actually want to say are wagging that dog.
Yeah.
And that comes from a complexity that also comes from I don't know, I'm a romanticist, so the drive of the negative is really,
It's
really
good.
intense in the book.
It's good.
So I'm just curious to know how you
And,
respond to that.
well, whenever I start to talk about this, I can't help myself but sound sanguine. When I'm doing the Thinking with Shakespeare pieces, I don't want to be cheery. I want to be serious about it, and I want to think as deeply with Shakespeare about pressing issues as I can. So I think that everything you said I agree with. I think we need to maintain the complexity and the difficulty of what we do. That should not stop us from sharing that complexity and difficulty with others. And it would be unconscionable to think that people who are not us could not understand complexity and difficulty. So I think that, I said this is my pitch to you. So it's a pitch. The work that people are doing, the work that we're doing, it should never be Shakespeare can cure melancholy. He doesn't. He makes melancholy into a kind of therapy and a deep sense of what therapy is. So yes, I'm with you. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I kind of think I want to add number 6.
Okay.
If I may, or try to. It seems to me that what you have highlighted here is a way of, or if we try to bring together all of this, then what comes to my mind is, well, what does it mean to be human today,
Mm-hmm.
for tomorrow, and what did it mean back then? And therefore, what we're actually trying to do is come to terms with a heritage of a way of thinking that has sustained society as it has developed in the last maybe 300-400 years. And we're coming face to face with what that way of thinking has originated. And so the 6th point is actually looking for that other way of thinking that is 5 points.
Okay.
Pointing towards it. So can we, as representatives of the humanities, open a path towards a different way of thinking what it means to be human, and so what our role in a more than human world?
Yeah, there's a lot that I could say in response to what you just said. Let me say 2 things. One is kind of off on the side, but I think it's important in light of what you're saying about being human, but it also connects with what you said about trying to capture some of literary wisdom, philosophical wisdom, wisdom of the past, and bring it forward into our present situation, rather than rather than keep it within the walls of the university. And I should say, when I talk like this, I don't mean that we don't do important work inside the, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. We teach thousands and thousands and thousands of young people, give them skills, teach them how to think, help them develop their thinking skills. All of that is valuable public work, because those people go out and I think they benefit from what they learn here. I mean, one of the things that we're learning from science, from philosophy, from literary studies, is that we were wrong to be human exceptionalists, to think that humans were different in kind from other creatures. And, you know, I taught this course for years at McGill on Shakespearean animalities. And, you know, people like Montaigne were arguing this a long time ago, as you know. And Shakespeare does that also. So in some ways, for all of these years that we thought we were alone in the world and we owned the rest of it, and we could do with it what we pleased, we can reach back to the people that I study, the people that you study, and we can connect them and bring them forward into conversation with scientists and scholars now who are discovering our kinship with the animal world. The other thing that I'll bring up, although I shouldn't, I'll knock on wood, is a project that a number of us are working on. We're going to apply for major funding, called the Public Humanities Design Project, where we're going to do this simple thing. We're going to create intensive workshops for early career scholars, that each workshop addresses a particular pressing modern question, and the real teachers in these workshops will be early modern artists and thinkers. So the idea is to transform the people that we study, like Shakespeare, like Erasmus, like Montaigne, into our teachers and conversation partners, and to use that knowledge and the skills that they developed to give early career scholars additional new skills, to also give them a broader sense of their own identity as scholars, so that they have a sense that they can take what they know and what they can do outside the academy, and they can flourish outside the academy.
Okay, we have two people who put their hands up, and I should have said a while ago, okay, it's almost the last question, but now I see a few more hands. So can we vote food or more questions? Food or more questions? You know, Paul isn't leaving, so I'm sort of thinking some of the questions could continue in the room next door. Is that okay? So how about we take Glenn's question and Jeff's, because those were the last ones I saw before I decided we should adjourn. So, Glenn.
Welcome back, Paul. And
Thank you.
Your work on publics for publicly, I think, for a long time. I also wanted to just acknowledge that today, historically, is very important in our, I guess, public-facing culture of the university, because the provincial government has officially recognized Indigenous rights in line with the United Nations Declaration of Rights, and becomes the first provincial jurisdiction in Canada to do so. And I wanted to connect this to the ways in which we, across the university, are engaged in work with decolonization, anti-racist activism, and historic work that makes us less into than just strictly producers of discourse, but deep listeners, and the importance of listening to those who would be excluded from humanities, and that humanities was seen as something that was professed outward, and that the skills that we were seen to be teaching were those of performance and rhetorical power and control, and less that of the relationship in which we understood our obligation to be listeners to others who had stories to tell, and then gave us the sense that there were only our stories that were important, or stories within the canon, or the stories within the institution, and that so much of our work in decolonizing has been work of deep listening. And I wonder, so So I wonder about adding then to the work of publics, a work of deep
Yep.
relationality that includes not just professing what we know, but also engaging with communities in a way that they have a space, and even to engage with Shakespeare and to as you've done in those performances,
Yeah.
to have engagements and actually to teach a form of deep listening along with performance.
Yeah. When we started iPlay, we never used the phrase public outreach. It was always public exchange. So it was just what you're talking about, creating structures and situations that allow for conversation. And that seems to me that if you're doing public humanities, it's not kind of putting up billboards around the city. It's creating spaces for conversation. That's absolutely right. And it's just a particular thing, if the food will wait just a minute, is when we were wrapping up the Early Modern Conversions project, I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting and valuable to bring this study that we've done of early modern Europe to the Americas in a big way and to engage with First Nations scholars. And so I just had sit-down meetings with a number of people about this. And when I said the word and sort of explained what we did, what I heard was amazing, because conversion is a topic for me. Conversion for my interlocutors was something that cut right to the bone for them. And of course, one of the outcomes of this series of conversations is I still think that project would be a valuable project, but not for me. I could not lead it. So I think you're absolutely right. Public scholarship depends on what you're calling deep listening.
Yeah, Paul, unfortunately I have the last question, because this is a real downer. As a Germanist, I have to defend the German university system. Not because it was in any way good, it sucked in many ways, but what came before wasn't any better.
Okay.
Let's face it, what came before was an elite institution where the residence with the public came about was it only addressed a certain social strata, and it was there for the creation and breeding of administrative elites. So it was really not better. And now we're trying to combine the two almost impossible things. The complete social indifference of the German university system, which is manifested in precisely the type of discourse Alan referred to, together with this actually only one-way entrance to the old university system. That's a tall order. Number two is the intellectual socialization I had. The dirtiest word somebody could be called was a Habermasian. And Paul, in all friendship, you sound like Habermas to me. There still is a certain belief in the notion of communication.
I do. I knew that.
The difficulty is not that we are arrogant or that other people are not as clever, not that we are not listening. What if the difficulty is really Donald Trump? And that is the clear decision not to engage.
Yes.
The clear
Yes.
decision that communication is no longer an option.
Well, communication is difficult, but we must not say it's no longer an option. And I am a Habermasian in as much as I think you're saying at the base of all Habermas's work, there is still an ideal about communicative action and about the possibilities of the public sphere. And I still think that's true. I take your point about the difficult. First of all, I take your point about I shouldn't have said it was great until the Germans sold us their idea of the university.
In so many other regards.
That was a mistake. I take your point about the political situation of the university, but I think that it is a mistake for us to give up our Habermasian ideals in the face of that particular history.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.